that could be it.
Investigators now contemplate a terrible thought. Could a random gust of wind, hitting at exactly the wrong split second, have been the difference between life and death?
Here it comes.
And we got a crash.
Parias's theory explains every aspect of the crash. The crew's confusion with the autopilot display
3.3 degrees
caused the plane to descend dangerously close to the mountain. Turbulence and an obscure safety feature brought it even closer. It was a fatal combination.
It's a fascinating lesson about the random dimension of accidents. Half a second before, half a second later, they wouldn't have the accident.
The discovery of a confusing cockpit display has enormous implications for the entire industry.
The flight instrumentation of aircraft like the DC-10, MD-11s, the 747s and so on, all the Boeing products and all the commuter products that were using that avionics suite had this vulnerability about it.
Investigators now face a daunting question affecting aircraft safety around the world. If the design of the autopilot interface isn't changed, how many more people could die? There's mounting evidence that the design of the autopilot interface on Airbus A320s led the Air Inter pilots to accidentally dial in a dangerous rate of descent.
3.3 degrees.
We felt a need to start the industry to work on this.
The plane's manufacturer, Airbus, responds immediately.
The main change, which was very quickly made, was to change the display window.
With the new design, if a pilot selects a vertical speed of 3,300, the entire 4-digit number is displayed.
So the confusion between an angle and a vertical speed was no longer possible.
For investigators, only one mystery remains. All Airbus A320 jets are designed to be equipped with a safety device known as a Ground Proximity Warning System, or GPWS.
Which is a downward-looking single-purpose radar that tells you how high you are above the ground directly beneath the airplane. And if it gets to be too low, it'll set off a warning.
Pull up, terrain. Pull up.
But Captain Heke
We have to watch our descent.
never received a warning for one very simple reason. His A320 didn't have that alarm.
The first question, of course, was why the aircraft was not equipped.
So it's not part of the minimum equipment list.
The Air Inter management had decided they did not like the false warnings that had been produced by GPWS equipment.
Normally, most planes fly slower than 250 knots when under 10,000 feet, but we flew at 350 knots until the final approach. So at those speeds, GPWS was always giving off false alarms.
Dans ces conditions, parce qu'il générait des fausses alarmes.
This decision, while legal, prevented the pilots from having one last line of defense before crashing into the mountain.
C'est pas possible d'imaginer un instant.
It's impossible to imagine that the pilot wouldn't have pulled up if he'd heard the alarm.
We should have a GPWS on commercial flights in any case, yes. That's an obvious conclusion.
The report will list these causes. flight deck aeronautics.
Investigators conclude that there was no single cause for the crash of Flight 148.
Training, lack of GPWS.
The tragedy involved an ill-fated combination of many different weaknesses in the airline industry.
We made 35 or so recommendations, including pilot training, about the ground proximity warning system, and so on.
The recommendations lead to sweeping changes. Pilots must now have more A320 training before getting behind the controls.
One of the two pilots now need to have at least 300 hours on the plane. They estimated that 300 hours were enough.
Another change, the design of a more heat-resistant black box.
The FAA did a test, did some studies what the thermal characteristics of post-crash fires were, came up with a value of 260 degrees C for 10 hours.
Delta Alpha, your position? Air Inter, Delta Alpha, Strasbourg.
As a result of the Strasbourg crash, the A320 is now a safer plane.
You can only get this change if there is what people perceive to be a good reason. And sadly, a good reason is still an accident.
But improved aviation technology is still no substitute for well-trained, well-prepared pilots.
There's an old axiom in aviation that you taught early on, that never let an airplane take you somewhere that your brain hasn't visited at least 5 minutes ahead of time. This is an excellent example of a flight crew that didn't follow that particular axiom.